something else. All right, Mick.
Okay, good. Good afternoon. Honored and distinguished guests, thank you for joining us today in the event on innovative approaches to addressing FCV challenges in middle-income countries, lessons from the refugee experience. I am honored to be here today with you all to welcome our presenters and panelist members, Dr. Isa Faye, Director General, Global Practices and Partnerships of the Islamic Development Bank, Mr. Felipe Munoz, Chief of Migration Unit, Inter-American Development Bank, Mr. Alvaro Calderon Ponce de Leon, Minister Plenipotentiary, Embassy of Republic of Colombia, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Government of Colombia, Mr. Hervé de Villuroche, Special Advisor on Development, UNHCR, and Mr. Warner Tankate, Head of Migration and Displacement Division, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Government of the Netherlands. Over the past several years, we have witnessed deepening global crises which have challenged decades of development gains. Surges in violent conflict in some of the poorest countries and increasingly in middle-income countries have led to instability and high levels of forced displacement, including refugees fleeing from conflict, persecution, and human rights abuses. While fragility, conflict, and violence in middle-income countries is not a new challenge against the current backdrop of heightened crisis, the middle-income countries continue to provide global public goods, especially in hosting refugees, migrants, and asylum seekers. Currently, 114 million people are forcibly displaced across the world, including over 36 million refugees. 56% of the refugees are hosted in middle-income countries. The prolonged nature of refugee situations for host countries is not only a humanitarian challenge, but also a development priority. At the same time, we realize the support for middle-income countries is limited and complicated, with sensitivities on borrowing to address FCV issues and hosting of refugees. Hence, it is an important development goal to incentivize these countries to address such matters with innovative approaches. In today's session, we will explore a few matters. For example, the efforts made by development institutions that support these countries in addressing these challenges. We will also look at the partnerships that support dialogue and coordination, and the sustainable development entry points, and how these have aligned to national priorities at the country level. With lessons learned, we look forward on how we can innovate and adapt to support these countries that are facing this growing crisis. Taking the example of displacement, we will hear from the government of Colombia on its efforts in integrating refugees, migrants, and asylum seekers into national systems, and how it has transformed this additional pressure into a positive development outcome. We will also hear from the UNHCR and the government of the Netherlands on their thoughts on how to incentivize the middle-income countries with concessional financing and innovative instruments. In addition, they will share the importance of linking development interventions to addressing crisis, partnerships, knowledge, and learning. At the World Bank, our experience with the operations of the Global Concessional Financing Facility, the State and Peace and Building Fund, and the Global Public Goods Fund have confirmed that concessional financing plays an important role in stimulating the middle-income countries' demand for FCV work. For these countries to receive concessional financing, there are a range of issues for them to reflect, such as the availability of own budget resources, political considerations, and partnerships with development practitioners. It is important to include the country's views in addressing FCV challenges. To help us understand these interesting topics, we have a great panel here today who will share their views with us. First of all, we will start with a presentation by the Islamic Development Bank, which will then be followed by the Inter-American Development Bank. I would like to request Dr. Isa Fai, Director of General Global Practices and Partnerships of the Islamic Development Bank, to share with us their experience in supporting middle-income countries through innovative and transformative initiatives, such as the Fragility Financing Facility, the FFF. Over to you, Dr. Fay.
Can I stay here?
Of course.
Good afternoon, colleagues. Thank you for inviting us to this conversation. This is really important for us as the Islamic Development Bank. I was in the panel earlier and just mentioning that 31 of our 57 member countries are fragile, and most of them are going through difficult times linked to the migration, refugee, and displaced people. So this is something that really we are trying to deal with on an ongoing basis. We're trying to provide solutions and then make sure that we can improve the livelihood of people on the ground. The way we do it is very simple. We're trying to be very pragmatic to respond to the crisis. While doing that, we want to do two things at the same time. We respond to crisis in a very, I would say a reactive mode, and then just responding to the emergency and going and trying to contribute to events and things. That's what we do, because as a multilateral development bank, our shareholders push us to really contribute when it's. But what we want to really move into and more is to be more proactive in addressing the root causes of fragility and refugees, the displacement. Well, because we think that that's how we're going to really change the needle if we want to make the change in some of these countries. But reacting is good, but making sure that we put the necessary required measure to solve the problem. For us, it starts with really having diagnostic tools. How do we make sure that we can monitor and follow on a kind of very frequent basis to see what are the countries in the fragility and why are they in the situation and how can we deal with them. And we have developed an index, the fragility index, that try to take into account different type of factors that lead into the fragility. And we monitor them very closely in such a way that we're not always in the reactive mode, and try to really go to some of the countries that we can help. And if we look at our country, the membership, 15 of them, if you look at the top countries hosting refugees, you will see that 8 out of 12 are from our membership and member countries. Sorry. So this is how we try to do with that. Most of them are MICs, and they cannot borrow through concessional windows. They cannot get money. And we have this situation in Syria in 2016 with the huge crisis and refugees. And refugees were going into Lebanon and Jordan, and these countries wanted to really go to the market and borrow money, but could not do that. And this is how the World Bank, the EIB, and the EBRD get together and put together the GCCF, which is the Global Concessional Finance Window, which we are very proud to be part of. And we have continued to trying to go to the deep root causes, because we believe that the issue is a very complex one. It's intricated. There are several dimensions, goes to economic, social, environmental, and also just the basic services. Access to basic services is the problem. When you look at the profile of refugees that we see, we see that they have issues related to just accessing education and health, being integrated into the communities, what they're going because of the language barriers, cultural barriers. They have issues into getting integrated into those societies. And then even legal status. Having an ID, just not able to have an ID is a problem for them insertion into those communities. How do we deal with that? We've tried to go the route of coming with programs that are more long-term kind of design in terms of trying to make sure that we can reduce some of those challenges that we can see. That's what we did in Syria. We did an education program that has benefited close to 16,000 people, and that was very successful. It gives them training, skills development, entrepreneurship, and that was very, very, very well benefited the country. And now we are moving into a full program, a fully fledged program that we call STEP, which is Skills, Training, and Education Program. And this is targeting 15 countries, and 8 of them are middle-income countries. So we're trying to go through education. We've done healthcare and health sectors in Jordan and Lebanon, and now we are moving into trying to put together a fund, which is called the Global Islamic Fund for Refugees. We're working with the UNHCR, and to make sure that really this is a fund also that will contribute to really solving the deep root causes again, not just reacting, but just developing and designing program that will help really these countries. So education, health care, and we're trying to do also a capacity building type of intervention, because as Multilateral Development Bank, it's sometimes difficult to get into those communities to help them. So we're using different channels, and one of them is the civil societies and NGOs. So we have put together a platform that we call Tadamun. It's a platform that brings together, I think, 1,600 CSOs and NGOs working on in terms of trying to solve the refugee situation that we have in our member countries. It's very successful, and we're looking forward to having to partner with you and beef of that program. Another one that we do, because one of the things that we realize is that part of the root causes is lack of economic opportunities. In some of the countries we're working on, we know there is issues in terms of access to finance and access to credit for farmers. So how did we try to resolve that? We put together a food security response program. And this food security response program is trying to really go into that deep root causes, going to the farmers and trying to help them have economic opportunities, generate revenues, and then save their livelihood. It's a $10.5 billion fund that we put together, and we're trying to really leverage to make sure that the food security issues, which is a real issue in some of our member countries, is solved. We've already disbursed 2.6 billion between 2022 and now, so just 2 years. So there's a lot of demand, and then we believe that will help really address some of the challenges. So we try to be proactive. We try to go also comprehensive, because the issue is not a simple one. It's not a trivial one. It's complex. So we try to have a multifaceted type of intervention, some of them directly to countries, on trying to build capacity, but also really trying to make sure that there is fund that is provided to different sectors: health, education, agriculture, and access to finance for farming. So this is what we do for now, and then we're looking forward to continue working and partnering with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Faye, for your rich and valuable insights onto the kind of innovative and transformative initiatives that your bank is doing. We will now continue with Mr. Felipe Munoz, the Chief of Immigration Unit, Inter-American Development Bank, and he will be sharing his insights on the opportunities and challenges in concessional financing and innovative approach, and the migration grant facility that incentivizes middle-income countries on forced displacement, and also share with the lessons learned. Over to you, Mr. Munoz.
Thank you, May, and thank you to Spiros and Omer from the GCFF, and for the panelists that are here with me, Isha, dear Alvaro, Orbe, and Warner. I'm the chief of the migration unit at Inter-American Development Bank. And of course, you are pretty aware what's happening in Latin America in terms of migration. This is a region that is changing rapidly in terms of the migration flows. And now is more an intra-regional migration process. And just to mention Venezuela, which is of course the most salient case, is almost 8 million people that have fled the country in the last 6 years. And in that way, of course, all the panorama about the migration in Latin America have changed very, very quickly. Just to highlight maybe 3 recent characteristics. The first one is the transit process. Before there is like the Darien gap between Colombia and Panama, and 5 years ago they crossed 5,000 people, and the last year have crossed 500,000 people. Then begin to combine the South America flows with the Central America flows, and it creates, of course, a complication. The second one is the family reunification, because there is a lot of movement now of women and children within the region, and that of course create another challenges for the transit countries and also for countries of destination. And maybe the third characteristic is the majority, at least for the Venezuelan migrants, when the surveys that we have available is that all of them decided, about 70%, when they answer the question if they are thinking to return to the country, the answer is no. Then there is a permanent, it's not more a humanitarian challenge, it's more a development challenge for the recipient countries. Then the Inter-American Development Bank decided to create 5 years ago, of course, copying others' initiatives as the GCFF and the Islamic Development Bank tools and the African Development Bank, and to create some financial and non-financial tools. One of the financial tools is a fund of $100 million to non-reimbursable resources. And I want just to highlight very quickly 5 aspects that I found particularly interesting for this kind of concessional instrument to try to help some middle-income countries in terms of coping with the challenges that the migration have created. The first one is this is a long-term development fund. I mean, we don't finance any humanitarian activity. We put the resources along with loans. The country said, I want to improve my capacity in education for the population as a whole. And we say, okay, we can put some non-reimbursable resources if you include the migrants as part of the beneficiaries of this project for the education as a whole. Then it's not a program for migrants. It's trying to begin the process of include the migrants as part of the beneficiary population. And I think it changed the narrative even in the countries, because it uses their own resources for migrants is also like a political complicated process. And I have the privilege to work previously with the government of Colombia with the support with the Inter-American Development Bank and as well for the work from the World Bank, especially from Paula this here. And we're trying to change this narrative and think. I think the second characteristic that I find quite interesting is the policy reforms capacity. It's because along the line, we can have the opportunity to begin to work with the governments to really make some changes in the policy regulations to adapt and accept the migrants. We have a lot of examples, but for example, we are working with Ecuador, trying that how we can include some migrants into the subsidy for rent program that they have for the national people. And these little changes is began to create a more permanent changes just for include the migrants that are going to be stay there for the long term. Then we as a bank, with these resources, we can have also the opportunity to influence in the policy reform. The third one is that we can leverage investment from donors. Then, for example, with this $100 million, we can leverage another $200 million in donors, because the donors always prefer go with a bank as a trust partner. And this is a long-term investment with all the capacity to follow up this investment. And this is one thing that the donors find interesting. But also we can combine expertise. For example, in Colombia, we work together with the World Bank in operations, in policy-based loan, but also in a health operation. And then maybe we divided geographically the country or sectoral the country. And then we can go to the GCFF as other window or the fund that we have available, and we can work together. The fourth idea is because this is important for the middle income countries, because of course there are another financial windows for another type of countries, but countries, for example, as I don't know, Colombia, Uruguay, Peru, when you go to the donor say we don't have resources for these kind of countries. Then when we have this, which is combined with loans, this is the possibility that we find for some of our members in Latin America to helping them, because you are pretty aware that the official development assistance for Latin America is pretty low. And I think the last one is that we can produce evidence-based information to accompany all the loans and the intervention that we have, because at the same time that we are as a bank, we have the financial tools, we have the capacity to produce evidence from the loans and to show the governments what I want to say at the end, that in the lesson learned, that show the evidence what is the cost of not doing this. Because we know that doing and integrating migrants, it costs. It costs in the short terms, it has benefits in the medium term, but not integrating the migrant has a very high cost, and we can produce this. And just to finalize, 2 lessons learned. First of all, is very important the platforms that we have in the development banks, the platform that we have with the Islamic Development Bank, the World Bank, the African Development Bank, because we can compare the experience from other parts of the world and show to the countries that this is not the unique country that are suffering, that are passing for this process. This sense of uniqueness that we are the only country, I think is kind. And that's it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Munoz, for sharing your insights and the bank and your bank's work on the refugees. We will now move to our panel discussion, and I will ask our panelists to share their insights. We will begin with Mr. Alvaro Calderon Ponce de Leon, and from the government of Colombia, who will speak on the progressive policies such as temporary protection status for social and economic integration of refugees and migrants. Over to you, Mr. Alvaro.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much for inviting the government of Colombia. For me, it's an honor to represent the government of Colombia in this event, and thank you very much. Thank you for the World Bank for the invitation. And actually, I would like to share with you part of the experience of Colombia. It's a very interesting experience because Colombia recently has experienced to be the destination country. We historically has been a country of origin and transit. We have more or less of 6 million Colombian as part of our diaspora. And we are learning from many sides, from different governments, different institutions, how to manage the immigration. Now we have more or less than 3 million Venezuelans living in Colombia. The decision that they stay in Colombia and to rebuild their life in Colombia. So in my intervention, I would like to share part of this story that is very interesting. The migration for Colombia is a very complex phenomenon that has a significant impact in the middle-income countries like Colombia is. Colombian migration policy has founded on the principle of human rights, which is why the country initiated a process of regularization and documentation of migrants. Colombia had to create a legal and institutional framework to deal with the migration crisis and the institutional articulation to conduct the socioeconomic integration of migrants. The government has implemented a series of measures from 2015 to the present day. First, the emergency humanitarian measures taken in 2015 and 2018, including providing access to emergency health service and education regardless immigration status. Second, they create measures between 2018-2021, access to basic social service and institutional coordination. And third, the integration measures between 2021 to the present day, temporary protection status, integration, socioeconomic strategy. The regularization was the starting point for the social economic integration, because through this process, we recognize individuals and they were able to fully exercise their rights with proper identification before public and private institutions, the political and economic reasons that support the regularization. The full identification and quantification of migrants benefit national security. Regularization increase household per capita consumption. The probability of working in formal sector increases by 10% points according to the experts' evidence, and the monthly income of regularized migrants is higher than of irregular migrants. Colombia's migration policy has been conducted by 3 key elements: human rights, development, and security. By prioritizing this aspect, the country aimed to create more inclusive and sustainable immigration system that benefit both migrants and the society. Additionally, the public policy recognizes the importance of international cooperation, while working very close with donors and international organizations. The Colombian government is able to leverage resources and expertise to provide more comprehensive and support for the migrants. To conclude, let me allow some outcomes of the social economic integration of migrants. Colombian government has provided 2.4 million documents to Venezuelan migrants. In terms of health, between 2017 and July of 2023, 2.3 millions of migrants have been treated in the national health system, and 1.2 million documented migrants were enrolled in the social security health system. In the education sector, at the close of enrolling in 2023, 623,000 Venezuelan minors were registered in the integrated enrollment system in the education institutions in the 32 departments of Colombia. In the employability sector, as of May 2023, 373,000 migrants are registered in the Ministry of Labor Integrated and Contribution Payment Plan. It means that they are already working and they are contributing to the social security system. As July 23, 969,000 migrants had registration in the Solidarity Income Program, and 150,000 households of migrants have benefited from this program. 788,000 migrants have access to at least one financial product. So the conclusion for Colombia is that the integration is the right way to work. Felipe mentioned that the cost to not integrate is higher than the cost to integrate. And with the principles of human rights and the international cooperation that we are receiving, they're working very closely with the World Bank, the Inter-American Bank, and with the donors, is the case to conduct a very realistic immigration policy. For instance, in concessional resources, we have received from the World Bank $1 billion that support the health sector and the employed sector in Colombia for migrants. And the migrants now is participating and contributed with $100 million in taxes. So it's part of the contribution of the migrants while they are integrated in the local communities. The challenge, we have a lot of challenges to solve. We have to socialize the documents. We have to socialize the private sectors of the benefits to work with the migrants. This is a very hard work that we are doing now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Alvaro, for your insights into what is happening in Colombia. We will now turn over to Mr. Hervé de Villarouche, Special Advisor on Development from UNHCR. He will speak about the role of Global Concessional Financing Facility and other instruments in bridging the humanitarian and development nexus. Over to you, Mr. de Villarouche.
Yes. Thank you very much, and good afternoon to all of you. Maybe just to start, as a reminder, it was said in the introduction, middle-income countries are heavily affected by forced displacement and are major host of refugees. We estimate that 55% of refugees are hosted in middle-income countries. You have a Venezuelan crisis, which has affected the whole Latin American continent. You have a Syrian crisis, which has affected Middle East countries, Turkey. You have Ukraine, which is affecting Moldova. Recently, we had Armenia, and we also have Egypt affected by the crisis in Sudan. We have Costa Rica affected by the situation in Nicaragua. So there are many situations. And middle-income countries have been very generous in accepting, hosting refugees. It came with humanitarian support, but as it has been said before, it is also a development challenge. And the main question is how to promote economic inclusion, economic integration in these countries on something which is not obvious in many cases, and deserves support. These countries do not have access to highly concessional resources like grants or the IDA sub-window, which is earmarked to low-income countries. But they still ask, why should we borrow for refugees? Why should we borrow for non-nationals, for hosting non-nationals? Why should we borrow for providing a global public good by hosting these people? To me, the balance has been found after the Syrian crisis with the setting up of the Global Concessional Financing Facility. It is a trust fund. I'm sure Werner will elaborate more on it. It is a trust fund which subsidize MDB financing, so World Bank and other regional development bank financing, putting them from non-concessional terms, although this money is still attractive for middle-income economies, to very concessional level, comparable to what low-income countries could get. So it's not a grant, but it's not a loan either at, let's say, at usual conditions, and it creates an incentive, and it worked well. So this facility, this trust fund, has been able to support 7 countries so far, and has unlocked finance loans up to 6.5 billion, and that's a lot. And I think it has helped us collectively to change the narrative from this is a burden, which is the case when people arrive, on public services, on the fiscal situation of the countries, with sometimes social tensions as well, competition for jobs, as if we invest in these situations, it will become an asset, an economic asset, and it could be turned into a success. It remains controversial whether this population, which are hosted in middle-income countries, have really contributed to growth. But I think it's now more and more proven. So the IMF did a very thorough research paper on the Venezuelan crisis, estimating that by 2030, the GDP of Peru, Colombia, and Ecuador will be increased compared to the baseline, and without having this influx of millions of Venezuelans, from 3.6% to 4.4%, Peru being the largest beneficiary, Colombia at 3.7%, being one of the largest as well. It is not surprising that when you have millions of people coming with skills, with capacities, and if accompanied by investment, that the GDP becomes higher. And as said very rightly by Felipe Munoz, the counterfactual would have been terrible. Not integrating these people would have created a burden, which I think would have been unbearable for these economies, but also would have had lasting consequences on humanitarian funding, which is very stretched. So this model is, I think, should be portrayed as a success story. It required a small investment in grants, well, not that small, but an investment in grants to make this global concessional financing facility, this trust fund, functioning. So all in all, more than 800 million have been mobilized by donors, and I would like to thank them, all of them, to allow this, to unlock this financing. This scheme remains very central. I hope it will be expanded to new beneficiaries going forward, because not all middle-income countries hosting large number of refugees are members so far, but recently it has been expanded to Costa Rica, to Moldova, to Armenia. So this is not, I hope it's not the end of a list of beneficiaries. And lastly, I would say that there are other instruments which could be mobilized, more innovative instruments. The Islamic Development Bank quoted the foundation on which we work together, the WACF. I think it's a very innovative instrument. It will benefit many countries, middle-income countries hosting refugees. The IDB has set up its own concessional scheme in parallel with the GCFF, and very successfully. And so there are other possibilities on which we have been working for quite a while, like supporting countries to issue social impact bonds. That could be a possibility since they provide a global public good. So let me stop there, thanking again, of course, the host countries, but also the donors to have set up this mechanism.
Thank you so much, Mr. Hervé, for sharing the insights on the various instruments and partnerships that could work together in bridging the humanitarian nexus. Now, we will turn over to Mr. Warren Tankate from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Government of Netherlands, who will speak on the importance of scaling up concessional financing and also the value addition and the role of the Global Concessional Financing Facility, prospects, and the MENA Private Sector Development Initiative. Over to you, Mr. Tankate.
Thank you. It's always a bit ungrateful to be the last speaker in a long list. So I will limit myself to some of the points which haven't been mentioned yet, or there's maybe some addition to be made to the points. First of all, I would like to congratulate Minister Jay from Colombia that I just come from another session on private sector initiatives in refugee situations, and there the Mexican participant had also very encouraging examples of integration, successful integration, and in that sense Latin America, the rest of the world, I think, has a lot to learn from the Latin American example, to be honest. Yeah, in terms of what is also reacting a bit to Hervé, whether or not integration is something to do. In principle, yes, but I think as well that we have to acknowledge that there's more elements that play a role in migration discussions, and these are also ethnical, sociocultural, religious differences play a role. Economies are very different as well. I think, for example, the Ukrainian refugees that also came to the Netherlands and find jobs quite easily. That was caused by the fact that at some point we had a job shortage in the labor shortage in the Netherlands. So it worked well. Of course, if you have a situation which is more difficult in terms of unemployment, it's a different story. Yeah, in terms of the GCFF, I have to say, all the speakers have have praised the GCFF as an instrument. I think it is a beautiful instrument because it also allows for donor coordination. I think in the migration field, many donors have the sort of reaction that they want to very much earmark their funds and also ensure that it goes to specific countries, and makes it difficult to coordinate. And the GCFF is an instrument that does coordinate. However, I have to say that I have taken over as co-chair since 2 months, and our pockets are pretty empty. So I would like to, anybody who is somehow sitting on funds in this room, please note this. And this is really regrettable, because if you have to fundraise for every part of the instrument, is also the strength of the instrument is also that the predictability of it. If you need to be able to be predictable in your financing, to be long term in your financing, then you can coordinate donors. Then you can also, then it can play its role as well. I was in Moldova a few weeks ago, and there it showed very beautifully how the GCFF and the reforms it supports find their way via prior actions in the loans that are being subsidized, and around that loan, then different ministries gather together, and it becomes a coordinating mechanism also within government, which also helps government to organize itself. And I have to say that which I found very uplifting, that the our Moldovan counterpart said that indeed funding can help reforms. I mean, we have of course always these discussions whether this conditionality helps or not. Perhaps not if you really put it, as a tit for tat, but to support certain innovators inside governments with finance can help, and this was acknowledged by the Moldovan government in that sense. So very, very, positive news. Another thing I wanted to mention when I'm wondering why GCFF has difficulty attracting funding. Also, it's a bit of a contradiction here, because we try to move out from the humanitarian space with respect to refugee situations, and yet we don't have the instrument to make that happen. And to be honest, the example of the Dutch government, I'm quite proud of. I didn't invent it myself, so it's not. But we have a big pot of money, Nexus funding, which we can use on migration in any way we like, whether it's humanitarian or totally developmental, private sector intervention, cash-based assistance, anything goes, and there's nobody saying you can't do this. And it also means that, for example, in our prospects program that we also finance, we can easily move back and forward. If one country falls back or has an economic problem, or you can also say, okay, we use the money for winterization or cash-based assistance, and when things go better, we can move and go for other more capacity building types of intervention. So you have this. It gives you a freedom of movement, of maneuver, that is very, very useful, I find, very effective, and almost to the level that you think, well, why do we need those different labels of funding? And to be honest, I think, if donors fund migration primarily with humanitarian funding, it's no surprise that if we want to move away from humanitarian interventions with respect to refugee situations, we have difficulty finding money because the money is not available in the pots that we need. So that is otherwise, I think lastly, I also think that if you and the Colombian example is very telling. What works in refugee type situation is government that allows take certain measures that allow refugees to integrate and to function and to have jobs and so on. The Mexican example, as I said, was the same, was similar. And of course, with the GCFF, that's what you support. In our, we just had a Dutch evaluation of our funding in the Syria crisis, and it was quite critical. It said, your interventions helped, but they did not really overall longer term help the situation. No wonder, because they were humanitarian in nature in the beginning, certainly, and the government policies left something to be desired in that respect. So yeah, I think a strong plea for GCFF funding, and actually we need to also think how to extend that way of working to other countries. But before we can do so, we need to also think amongst donors how we improve our own funding systems to allow for these type of interventions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I will hand over to Subhash for any questions that come online. So Subhash will read those questions with us now.
We have a question for Dr. Isa.
Will the Global Islamic Fund for Refugees also be available for internally displaced persons?
Yes, right. I'm looking to my colleagues who is the architecture of this. So is this, we can also cater for the internal displaced person? Yes, sir.
Very good. Do we have any more questions, Subhash? All right. So I'll turn to, oh, wow. Where do we start? Okay. Can we start from the lady first who's sitting nearest to me? Yes, please do that.
Thank you all for the great presentation. I don't have to belabor this point, but we're talking about migration, so the impact on women and girls is well known. So I'd like for you to maybe explain or expound for us how you've used gender analysis and gender transformative approaches to design the programs that you just shared with us. Thank you.
Does anyone want to take this question? Okay.
No, thank you for the question. We not only because this is a mandate for the bank as a cross-cutting topic, but also because we receive resources from donors, especially from Canada, that push on us like a very strong mandate that we have to consider the gender approach all along the process of analysis. First of all, in analysis, we produce, for example, a report in gender and migration in Latin America and the Caribbean, trying to identify what are the specific challenges that have the women and girls in the countries of origin, in the process of transit, but also in the process of destiny. In some of the operation trying to address specific situations. For example, Ecuador has one of the highest rate of violence, gender-based, not only for women from Uruguay, but also for migrants from Venezuela. And we have a specific intervention, and we have measured on targets that also change in policy reforms to try to consider and to open up the channel, for example, for these women to can access the justice. And in every project that we have to consider, and we have different measures just to consider the specific vulnerability, of course, for women.
Thank you very much, Mr. Muniz.
No, just a footnote on that. I'm glad to report that in the Islamic Development Bank, we're also moving towards that. My colleague is saying it was not there a few years back. The gender was not there, but now we're bringing the gender lens into what all we do, including monitoring and tracking. Because if you don't measure it, you're not going to be developed. Yes.
Thank you very much. Okay, Mr.
I like very much this question because actually the Colombian government creating the presidency of Gustavo Petro a new ministry, that is the Ministry of Equity or Equality. And this ministry will be in charge to conduct the integration of migrants. And with the reform of the norms to expand the regularization, is thinking in women and actually women and minors that are without whole family, without the father. So it facilitates the integration of those people and facilitate the regularization for women and minors that are alone. So this is the new reform that we are doing now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I know there are a few more hands. We'll start for the first row. Over to you. Oh.
It's so challenging to go there and ask questions. My question would be to Alvaro, but before I ask the question, I have to give an example, a successful example. I come from a humanitarian organization. We're a nonprofit. That doesn't sound an attractive word for banks and aid agencies, but we are the largest humanitarian for overstock and donated medical equipment and supplies. comes back to the refugees. We have partnered with Islamic Development Bank. We have received, for example, $300,000. We have multiplied that. We have been able to send to Niger, Guinea, and Chad over $4 million worth of medical equipment supply. So we multiply $300,000, $4 million. So here for Inter-American Bank, you mentioned about your support specific to the countries. You include that support in that plan, right? For humanitarian especially. Would you be interested to partner with humanitarian organizations like us, for example? If you could just elaborate and just let us know how we can collaborate with you.
Mr. Felipe, over to you.
No, the answer is yes. We already work with so many NGOs. I had the opportunity when I worked for the government of Colombia to work, and I think the support of the NGOs, not only international NGOs, but especially the local NGOs, has been absolutely valuable for the migration situation in Colombia. And of course, we as a bank, sometimes our implementators agencies are local NGOs, and or for even for knowledge, for analysis of information, we have a various, like a set of relationship, and we can talk later.
So in Colombia, we work with one interagency group that's confirmed by more or less 81 organizations between non-governmental organizations and UN agencies. The coordinators is OEM and the UNHR. And all organizations are welcome to work complementary with the public policies, of course. In the integration, the humanitarian solution, we are working very high in humanitarian solutions in the Darien, because we cannot stop the migrants. The migrants are moving, and we cannot stop them. So we are going to, and we are providing the humanitarian solution with the GIFIM, that is in interagency group. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have another question on the front row.
Yeah, you could just
Thank you for coming forward.
Yes, thank you. I'll jump right into the question. So a lot has been talked about Latin America being a good example of what's been done when it comes to integration of refugees and migrants. As a Latin American, that makes me feel really proud that we can be an example to the world. But it makes me think about, does this happen because most of the people who are integrated are of similar origin, language, and religion? Can you speak of the situation, perhaps offer some data of the situation of Haitians, Africans, or Africans, Asians who have an increased presence in the region?
I think yes. I think this is one of the reasons. I don't have just now the paper to just demonstrate, but of course, in terms of language, for example, being the barrier of language, one of the things that prevents more integration, and being more an intra-regional migration, yes. And even we can find some difference, for example, because the Haitians and the other nationalities, for example, in Chile, and there are some research about it. Yes, this is one of the reasons. And about the extra-regional migration, is not one mandate, but there are other challenges for people from Asia, from Africa that are crossing the country, not specifically that they want to stay because they are trying to reach the south border of the United States and trying to enter into the United States. But of course, there is a different challenge, and more in the humanitarian side, because they are not decided in a higher percentage to be in one of the countries just to cross the continent.
Yeah, clearly Latin America has set an excellent example for the rest of the world, but it's not the only region where we have success stories in terms of economic integration. Let me speak very positively about our experiences in Jordan and in Lebanon, which have been hosting Syrian refugees. Both countries have allowed refugees to work, sometimes with some limits, but most of them have found jobs with a system of working permits in Jordan, and in Lebanon with some sectors which have been open to refugees despite a very challenging economic situation. But you can also think about Turkey. Turkey is hosting 3 million refugees. In the southern parts of the country, you have a refugee population which could go up to 40, sometimes in small cities, up to 50% of the population. So it's huge, and these people are fully integrated. They are working. They have access to services, to national services. So this story of socio-economic inclusion has been successful in many regions.
Thank you so much. We have more questions from the second row.
Thank you. Thank you very much to the panel for a very interesting session. I just wanted to draw the attention of the panel to a little bit of a forward-looking problem, which is the climate refugees, which is forecasted to be over 2 million, according to the World Bank, and over 1 billion from another source by 2050. I was wondering, from an agency level, is there any strategy or visioning that is happening? Thank you.
We are beginning to work in climate refugees. We are just collect the data for Latin America because there is not a lot available data. And of course, in terms of calculations of how many people is going to move is a very, it's like a complicated process. But we are collecting some information, specifically, of course, from the dry corridor of Central America and from other parts of South America. And we are beginning to work with a position paper this year, but we are just in the preliminary stage. I think that another Multilateral Development Bank has a lot more experience about that.
Mr. Ave?
Very quickly, it's a huge question and a complicated question at the same time, because we don't at UNHCR we don't say that some people are climate refugees. The international definition is based on persecution and conflict, fleeing persecution and conflict. But climate change is an aggravating factor of other tensions, and especially when resources are scarce and when you have competition for resources, and resources could be deeply impacted by climate change. It's clear that it has a huge impact, and this modelization of let's say being forward-looking are of course of great concern of us. To be operational and concrete, what we recommend is to take forced displacement situations in climate adaptation plans, national climate adaptation plans. That would be a huge progress and will help countries to set up policies on these questions going forward.
Thank you, Mr. Irway. Are there any more questions on the room? What about this side of the room? Oh, sorry, there's one more. Yes, please go ahead.
Left me alone, Omar. I would draw the attention again to the Colombian case, if I may. And it's remarkable in many ways what you have been doing. But one of the issues that I found most outstanding is how you were, at least to my humble understanding, how you were able to keep the issues of integration of migrants away from politics. Sort of, there was a broad consensus that they were able to establish, and in a way, at least, that appears to be sort of steering the debate away from a debate that would have been detrimental to the issues that were necessary to take for integration, which is not the case in many other country contexts. And I was wondering whether you could speak to that, if you first of all share this assessment and that I'm having on my humble experience, and how you were able to achieve that, and if there are any takeaways for other contexts. Thank you.
No, it's not out of the political debate. Actually, it's part of the political debate. But let me explain that in that way. I think that in the case of Colombia is very particular because, as I mentioned at the beginning of my intervention, Colombia is the recent years that we had experience for immigration. Our historical experience is on immigration and transit because of our geopolitical position. So the political debate in the Congress is more about the Colombians outside our diaspora for only one reason, because they have two representatives in the Congress that represent the interests of our diaspora. In the case of Colombia, the political debate is around the bilateral relation with Venezuela. No, because of the migrants. The problem is not the migrants in our political debate. It's not the center of the political debate. For example, our government belongs to the left side. It's the first time in Colombia that we have a left side government. And the right side parties, the opposition, is not against the Venezuelans. They are not against the Venezuelans. They are not against the public policies toward integration of the migrants. They are worried about the security, but not the security around the migrants. So the debate is a little different, and I think that is because our immigration experience is very, very recently. And on the other hand, our borders, we have 5 borders that is used by migrants. And this is a very difficult borders. For example, in the border between Colombia and Ecuador, we have 2 official points. But the authorities, the police and the migration authorities has identified more than 100 informal points. So it's very difficult to control the borders. And of course, this porosity affects the local security, the local development, the local policies of the governors and the mayors. But their debate is according to the security, but not according to the migration influence. Now, in the recent data that I received actually was yesterday, the employment of migrant is almost in the 70%. So we are talking that we have a very high access to employ in migrants in the 3 main cities, Bogota, Medellin, and Cali. In the other city, we have other data, but the employment is very high. And when we show to the mayors and to the governments the participation in the social security contributions and the taxes contributions, for this, the movie is absolutely different. Cucuta is the city that is close to Venezuela border. Is the main city close to Venezuela border. This city, the 35% of the consumption depends on the migrants. So the people that have the small restaurant, the small pharmacy, is receiving the money from the migrants more than from the local society. So the political debate is a little different than in other countries. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Alvaro. We have a question online. Oh, sorry, I missed your hand. Yes, yeah, you can come with your question.
Thank you so much. My question is about education, and given the decreasing resources to education globally, I'm curious about how you are prioritizing education in your various financing mechanisms, given that the fact that when children are faced with crisis, the number one thing that they want to do is to continue their education. And we know the huge returns that education has to economies and societies as a whole. So would love your thoughts on that. Thank you.
First of all, let me say that the majority of the countries in Latin America, except one, have the universal access for children independent, regardless their nationality. But of course, it's not 100% comply for so many reasons, for reasons of capacity. We have 2 loans, specifically in Panama and in Belize, that are devoted to helping them to strengthen their education system. And of course, we have some technical cooperation with the Ministry of Colombia that have more than 500,000 children. But of course, this is still a lot of things to do in terms of education, because it's not only that they can get to the classrooms, is in order to try to level up the condition that they came with, is in order to certifications, and is in order to xenophobic sentiments among in the schools. And then we have like a set of tools to work, because you not only a thing of access, but yes, this is one of the things that we discuss with the governments every day.
Yeah, for us, this is what I was mentioning about the root causes. I think that this is exactly where we go in terms of trying to bring some solutions to some of the basic needs, which education, healthcare, and so on. We've been successful in Syria. 15,000 people benefited, and now we have approved just last year the STEP program, which is skills training education program, which is really trying to go to employability, entrepreneurship, and so on. So this is really key to our program.
Thank you so much. We have a question online. I'll ask Subhash to read it to us. Thank you.
We have a question for UNHCR. Mr. Harvey mentioned that there could be other innovative approaches besides the GCFF, like social impact bonds. Can you please further explain why and how impact bonds could be interesting approach to promote integration in middle-income countries? Is UNHCR promoting the implementation of impact bonds? If so, do you have successful experiences?
Yeah, thank you very much. So impact bonds have been successful to help countries to raise funds to borrow internationally at better conditions when providing global public goods. We don't have so far a refugee global or a refugee bond, but this is something we try to discuss with countries, because we think there is a good case, and that could raise interest from investors with a monitoring system for them to fundraise at better conditions than they could get from the markets. So, and Latin America may be the place where it could happen.
Right, thank you. I hope that answers the question. So to wrap up today's dialogue, we learned that it is important to increase support to middle-income countries with strengthening partnerships, innovation, resource mobilization, development, and sharing of knowledge. Concessional financing instruments like the Global Concessional Financing Facility, the Fragility Financing Facility, and the Migration Fund, among others, play an important role in supporting middle-income countries such as Colombia, and that could also be scaled up elsewhere. Beyond financing, the strategic value of these platforms bring together donors, development practitioners, institutions, the United Nations, the MDBs, for addressing complex issues like forced displacement, refugee situations that have proven to be a worthwhile investment. From the World Bank's perspective, the evolution roadmap process and its focus on global public goods is another key framework that can also help to address the FCV crisis. We hope that you find today's discussion informative and helpful in shining a light on how the governments and international development partners are trying to address fragility in middle-income countries. We look forward to continuing engagement and discussions on this important topic. Once again, I would like to thank our esteemed panel members, presenters, and all of you participants who are with us here in person and online for joining us today. Thank you. Have a good day.
So just very quickly, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much again for joining. In the front lobby, we